They called him Spain's most depraved king. A monarch whose appetites were so bizarre, his bedroom became more infamous than his throne. But one night in 1819 would cement his place in royal infamy forever. And it all began with a 16-year-old bride and a secret too grotesque to imagine. Before we begin, drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. Like this video, share it with friends who love dark history, and subscribe to Historian Bunker. Turn on that notification bell so you never miss the shocking truths history tried to bury. Historians rank him at the very top of Spain's worst monarch list, and that's saying something. His cruelty, perversion, and political incompetence make him a contender for one of the most twisted rulers in all of European history. But you don't know the real story. Because what you've heard about royal marriages, noble bloodlines, and the dignity of European monarchy is just the polite version. The truth is a grotesque saga of deformity, humiliation, and raw human horror. Ferdinand, known later as El Rey Felon, the Felon King, didn't just rule Spain. He turned the royal palace into something between a brothel and a torture chamber, a place where luxury masked corruption. But on his wedding night, the facade cracked. The bride was Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, a convent-raised princess who believed babies came from storks. At 16, she had never been told what marriage entailed. That ignorance would become her only shield and her greatest vulnerability. The royal palace of Madrid glittered that October night in 1819. Servants whispered in the halls. German attendants, too embarrassed to explain marital duties, had dressed the young queen in white, left her with a rosary, and closed the door. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling, clutching that rosary so tight the beads dug into her palms. The silence was suffocating. Then, the heavy door creaked open. In stepped the King of Spain, and with him, the beginning of a nightmare. Ferdinand was 35, overweight, gout-ridden, his lips thick and protruding, his eyes sharp and predatory. But it wasn't his face that made Maria Josepha's blood run cold. It was what medical history still struggles to classify, his grotesque deformity. Macrogenitosomia. In plain words, genitals monstrously oversized, but not in the way anyone might expect. French writer Prosper Mérimée described it as thin as a candle at the base, swelling to the size of a fist at the tip, as long as a billiard cue. The young queen's eyes widened in terror. In that instant, instinct took over. She bolted from the bed, screaming, her bare feet slapping against the cold marble floor as the King of Spain staggered after her in drunken pursuit. Imagine it, the ruler of a great empire, naked, lumbering through his chambers in a rage, trying to catch a teenage girl running for her life. The scene could have been comedic if it wasn't so utterly disturbing. Ferdinand's pride couldn't endure the insult. Bursting into the adjoining chamber, still fully exposed, he screamed at the queen's attendants. He demanded they prepare her for him within 15 minutes. The women stood frozen in horror. These were the queen's own ladies, including her sister-in-law. Somehow, they had to explain to a sheltered child what was about to happen. Their whispered words made her face pale, her lips tremble, her hands clutched the rosary harder. When Ferdinand returned, his lust reignited. The queen's terror reached its breaking point. Her body betrayed her. In the oppressive silence of the royal bedchamber, the smell came first. Then the sight, the soiled sheets, stained with human waste. The king recoiled, his face twisting in disgust. "Queens," he sneered, "do not possess the fragrance of civet." With that, he stormed out, leaving the girl alone in a bed that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her short life. This was only the beginning. That night would set the tone for a marriage built on fear, humiliation, and a grotesque power imbalance. And it was far from Ferdinand's first disaster in the bedroom. His past wives had already suffered worse. Before Maria Josepha, there was Maria Antonia of Naples, his first bride. That marriage had been so bizarre, so humiliating for both parties, that it became whispered legend in European courts. And it all came down to Ferdinand's anatomy. If you think this wedding night was disturbing, wait until you hear about the first 11 months without consummation, miscarriages, public humiliation, and an intervention from the Catholic Church itself. This is where the scandal truly begins. Long before Maria Josepha's wedding night disaster, Ferdinand had already earned a reputation in royal circles, not for political genius, not for military victories, but for his utter incompetence in the bedroom. In 1802, as a young prince of just 17, Ferdinand married his cousin, Maria Antonia of Naples. She was lively, intelligent, and politically astute, the kind of queen who could have been a partner in power. But she was about to face the most bewildering wedding night in European history. By all accounts, Ferdinand spent most of that first night staring at his bride, not admiring her beauty, gawking, confused, like a man confronted with an unsolvable puzzle. He awkwardly touched her face, her arms, her chest, and then simply stopped. In her private letters, Maria Antonia described the experience as a night of bewilderment and shame. She claimed Ferdinand seemed utterly ignorant of the ways between husband and wife. What she didn't know was that his ignorance ran far deeper than inexperience. The truth was anatomical. His condition, thin at the base, grotesquely swollen at the end, made normal intimacy nearly impossible. Attempts were not just awkward, but physically painful for his partner. Even the royal physicians were baffled. For 11 months, the marriage remained unconsummated. Ferdinand's efforts followed a predictable pattern: nervous arousal, clumsy attempts, then sudden retreat. Frustration grew on both sides. The Spanish heir couldn't perform the most basic marital duty. Maria Antonia's mother, Queen Maria Carolina of Naples, began sending increasingly desperate letters to Madrid. She described her daughter's misery in shocking terms. She weeps nightly. He feels nothing. Inducements fail. There is no pleasure, no effect. Finally, the matter reached such absurdity that the royal confessor, a Catholic priest, was called in to give the prince a private lesson. Imagine it. The future king of Spain sitting red-faced while a priest explained the mechanics of reproduction. The humiliation spread through Europe's courts like wildfire. Ferdinand was mocked in whispers as the prince who needed a priest to teach him about women. It was a scandal, but not one that shamed him into reform. When he did finally succeed, the result was catastrophic. Maria Antonia suffered 2 miscarriages, likely from internal injuries caused by his deformity. The strain on her body was immense. By the age of 21, she was dead, her health broken, her marriage a tragedy. For Ferdinand, her death was not a moment of reflection, but liberation. The prince who couldn't perform had finally learned how, and now there was no stopping him. His appetites grew unchecked, spilling beyond the palace walls. By 1814, Ferdinand had ascended to the throne, returning from exile after Napoleon's defeat. He was 30, sexually frustrated from years of restraint, and now in possession of absolute power. Madrid was about to learn just how dangerous that combination could be. Every night, the king slipped from the palace in a dark cloak, heading for the city's most infamous brothels. His favorite was run by a madam named Pepa la Malaguine, a woman with a clientele so disreputable that decent citizens crossed the street to avoid her door. Ferdinand didn't come alone. He brought with him a pack of young aristocrats, men as corrupt as their king. Together, they prowled Madrid's red light district like predators, turning the city's underbelly into their personal playground. It was here that Ferdinand's deformity, once his greatest humiliation, became his twisted badge of pride. Witnesses recalled the king drunkenly challenging his companions to measurement contests in the brothel's smoky back rooms. He always won, but it wasn't just about size. Ferdinand developed a fetish that chilled even the hard-bitten women of Madrid. According to Count José María de Villalobos, the king confessed, "What I enjoy most after possessing them is collecting the rags stained with the proof of their maidenhood." This was no passing curiosity. Ferdinand kept these blood-stained sheets as trophies, carefully labeled with the names and dates of his conquests. He pursued them with the same dedication other kings reserved for collecting art or rare jewels. While Madrid's poor starved, Ferdinand built a private museum of ruined innocence. And this, disturbingly, was only one facet of his depravity. The king's hunting ground extended far beyond the brothel district, into villages, noble houses, and even the palace itself. It was a pattern. After political victories or brutal crackdowns, the number of trophies in his collection would spike. Violence in the streets was mirrored by violence in the bedroom. His reign blurred the lines between sexual predation and political punishment. But even amid this depravity, Ferdinand knew he needed one thing above all: an heir. And that quest would bring him to a second marriage that ended in one of the most horrifying deaths in Spanish royal history. Her name was Maria Isabel of Braganza. She was 19, plain, and Portuguese, mocked in Madrid before she even arrived. Yet she would change the cultural landscape of Spain, even as her husband ignored her in favor of his nightly debauchery. Maria Isabel founded the Prado Museum, supported the arts, and tried to bring dignity to a court drowning in scandal. But for Ferdinand, she was just a vessel, a womb that could produce the son he desperately wanted. In 1818, she became pregnant. The court celebrated. But childbirth in the 19th century was always dangerous, and in Maria Isabel's case, it became fatal. The baby was breech. The physicians faced a grim choice: save the mother or save the child. Ferdinand didn't hesitate. Save the child. Cut her if you must, he ordered. And so, in a candlelit room thick with the smell of blood and opium, the surgeons began an emergency cesarean. Without anesthesia, Maria Isabel's eyes shot open mid-procedure. She was awake. She screamed, a sound that echoed through the palace corridors as they cut into her womb. The baby had been dead for hours. The queen bled out in agony at the age of 21. The court whispered that Ferdinand's deformity had caused the complications. Others blamed the syphilis he'd likely contracted from years in the brothels. But Ferdinand himself felt no guilt. Within a year, he was looking for a third wife. And that's when Maria Josefa Amalia entered the picture. The innocent girl who would soil herself in terror on their wedding night. But their story didn't end there. Her resistance would spark one of the strangest royal interventions in history. Because when Ferdinand failed to get what he wanted from his teenage bride, he wrote to the Pope. After the infamous wedding night in 1819, Ferdinand avoided Maria Josefa for a week. It wasn't mercy, it was wounded pride. He was the king of Spain, and yet his young bride had bolted from him in terror and humiliated him in front of the court. When he finally returned to her chambers, Maria Josefa was ready. She had the quiet obedience of a convent-raised girl, but when Ferdinand tried to touch her, she exploded into defiance. She bit, scratched, and even kicked him squarely in his deformity. The king staggered back, howling. Few men could claim to have brought a monarch to his knees. Maria Josefa did it in her nightdress. But her rebellion only deepened Ferdinand's resolve to break her. What followed was a nightly standoff. Ferdinand would enter her room, and she would clutch her rosary, reciting prayers, ignoring every advance. Her weapon wasn't strength, it was sheer, unshakable innocence. She truly believed children came from storks. When Ferdinand tried to explain the realities of conception, she accused him of lying. God would not create such a vile method of creating life, she said. You are testing my virtue with these lies. Weeks passed. Months. The marriage remained unconsummated. Rumors spread through the palace and beyond. Ambassadors sent reports to their governments. The King of Spain is being rejected by his teenage wife. For a man obsessed with his sexual prowess, it was the ultimate insult. And so Ferdinand reached for his most audacious weapon, a letter to Pope Pius VII, the spiritual leader of Catholic Europe. Imagine the scene in Rome, an aging pope, survivor of Napoleon's wars, opening a letter from a desperate king. Ferdinand begged the Holy Father to command his wife to fulfill her marital duties. The Pope's reply, preserved in Vatican archives, was a masterpiece of polite coercion. He reminded Maria Josefa that marital intimacy was not only permitted but required by God, and that producing heirs was her sacred duty. When the letter arrived in Madrid, Maria Josefa wept. She agreed to obey, but only on her own terms. Before each encounter, she would pray the entire rosary. She would keep her eyes closed, and she would think only of the Virgin Mary. For Ferdinand, it was a humiliation beyond words. The man who collected virgin blood as trophies was now reduced to lying beside a motionless girl, lips moving in prayer, while he tried to sire an heir. For 10 years, this bizarre arrangement continued. 10 years of rosary-accompanied intimacy. 10 years without a single child. 10 years of a queen who turned every act into a religious vigil. In 1829, Maria Josefa died at just 25, officially of fever. But in the palace, her passing felt like a release. Ferdinand had failed yet again. 3 wives, 2 dead, no legitimate sons. Time was running out. And then came Maria Cristina of Bourbon II Sicilies. She was 23, beautiful, and, crucially, prepared. She understood Ferdinand's deformity wasn't just a curiosity, It was a mechanical problem, and she came ready with a solution. Her ally was the royal physician, Dr. Antonio Hernandez. After reviewing medical records, Hernandez proposed something unorthodox: a silk cushion with a precisely cut hole, for centimeters deep, designed to prevent injury during intercourse. To Ferdinand, this was presented as a royal necessity, not an insult. His ego swallowed it whole. On their first night, Maria Cristina treated the procedure like protocol, positioning the cushion with the calm of a surgeon preparing for an operation. It worked. Within 3 months, she was pregnant. In 1830, she gave birth to a healthy daughter, Isabella, the future Queen of Spain. 2 years later, she produced another daughter. Ferdinand finally had heirs. But those births triggered a political earthquake. Spanish law barred women from the throne. Ferdinand's brother, Don Carlos, expected to inherit. Ferdinand, unwilling to let go, issued the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, changing the rules overnight. That single act would plunge Spain into the First Carlist War, a bloody civil conflict that would kill hundreds of thousands. All because a king with a monstrous deformity finally figured out how to use a cushion. And yet, amid the politics and the wars, one question remained. What became of the king's infamous collection of blood-stained trophies? The answer is as disturbing as the man himself. When Ferdinand died in 1833, Maria Cristina wasted no time securing her daughter's throne. But before she could move into full regency, she had to deal with the dead king's private quarters and what lay hidden inside them. In a cedar chest, wrapped in silk, palace servants found dozens of folded cloth squares. Each was stained, each labeled with a name and a date in Ferdinand's own hand. It was his trophy collection, the bloodied linens from virgins he had claimed. Some names were familiar to the court: maids, noble daughters, widows of executed liberals. Others were unknown, likely village girls brought to the palace by force or deception. The dates told an even darker story. Investigators noticed that the largest clusters of trophies coincided with political repression. After every uprising crushed, every execution ordered, the king would add several new acquisitions in quick succession. It wasn't random lust. It was targeted vengeance. Defeat a rebel, destroy his daughter. Execute a liberal officer, ruin his widow. For Ferdinand, political victory and sexual conquest were two sides of the same coin. One name in particular chilled everyone who saw it. Anna, 15 years, daughter of Colonel Bermudez, February 1823. Bermudez had been executed for treason after the failed constitutional revolt. Anna had come to the palace to beg for her father's life. She left with her father dead and her innocence taken. In Ferdinand's chest, her name sat alongside the date of her father's execution, as if her violation were part of the same official act. Maria Cristina, horrified, ordered the entire collection burned, but not before several courtiers documented what they had seen. Their accounts matched perfectly: the careful folding, the silk wrappings, the precise handwriting. It was damning proof that Ferdinand's predation was deliberate, systematic, and political. His reign was not just corrupt, it was weaponized at the most intimate level. The destruction of the chest removed the physical evidence, but the testimonies survived. And they revealed something else. Ferdinand rarely kept trophies from encounters that failed, meaning the true number of women he targeted may have been far higher. Because predators don't catalog failure. For every bloodstained cloth, how many women escaped? How many were silenced before they could speak? How many simply disappeared from history? Ferdinand took those secrets to the grave. But even in death, his reputation festered. His brother declared war almost immediately. His widow shocked Spain by marrying a palace guard. His daughter would inherit not just a throne, but a dynasty stained by scandal. Isabella II, the daughter born thanks to the infamous royal cushion, would grow up to have her own torrid scandals. Some claim she inherited her father's appetites, her rumored affairs fueling whispers that her children were fathered by lovers, not her husband. By the time she was overthrown in 1868, the Bourbon dynasty was so tarnished that the monarchy itself seemed like a relic of disgrace. Ferdinand's personal depravity had left a political wound that took generations to heal. And yet, for all the civil wars, for all the scandals, what the people remembered most were the stories from the bedroom. The wedding night where a queen soiled herself, the Pope's intervention, the silk pillow solution, the blood-soaked chest. Ferdinand had wanted to be remembered as el deseado, the desired one. Instead, he became a grotesque cautionary tale, a king whose anatomy and cruelty reshaped a nation. And here's the irony. In the end, his political decisions, his wars, even his heirs, mattered less to history than the stories whispered about his bedroom. That, perhaps, is the greatest insult a monarch can endure. Because Ferdinand II didn't just fail as a ruler. He failed as a man, and turned that failure into a weapon. His reign is proof that power without humanity doesn't just corrupt, it deforms. By the autumn of 1833, Ferdinand's body was giving out. Years of gluttony, disease, and debauchery had left him swollen, crippled, and unable to walk without assistance. Yet even as death crept closer, he clung to the one thing he had always valued: control. Control over his wives. Control over his court. Control over his own legacy. In his mind, the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, the decree that placed his daughter Isabella on the throne, would define how history remembered him. But history had other plans. When Ferdinand died on September 29, 1833, Spain's mourning was perfunctory. His political enemies saw opportunity. His brother, Don Carlos, immediately challenged Isabella's succession, igniting the First Carlist War. It was a civil war drenched in blood, pitting absolutists against liberals, brothers against brothers, and killing hundreds of thousands. All sparked by a legal maneuver born from a silk cushion in the royal bedchamber. Because without that cushion, without Maria Christina's engineering solution to Ferdinand's deformity, Isabella would never have been born. And without Isabella, there would have been no need to overturn centuries of succession law. In a strange way, the cushion became the ultimate symbol of Ferdinand's reign. A king so malformed that the continuation of his dynasty required a literal piece of furniture. A monarchy so compromised that its stability rested on a 4-centimeter hole in silk. After his death, Maria Christina moved quickly to secure her daughter's throne. She burned Ferdinand's trophy collection, sealed damaging documents, and crafted a public image of the late king as a defender of the crown, rather than a predator in it. But the truth lingered. In the smoky corners of Madrid taverns, people still whispered about the king's deformity, the wedding night disaster, the Pope's intervention. The stories passed from servants to their children, growing darker with every retelling. Ferdinand had sought to be el deseado, the beloved. Instead, he became a grotesque fireside tale, a cautionary example of what happens when power is divorced from decency. Even his daughter Isabella, the heir he had engineered into existence, carried the shadow of his legacy. Her own scandals, whispered affairs, illegitimate children, and a court drenched in intrigue seemed almost inherited, as if vice had seeped into the bloodline itself. By the time she was overthrown in 1868, the Bourbon dynasty was fractured beyond repair. The monarchy would limp on in fits and starts, but it never fully regained the mystique it had before Ferdinand's reign. The irony is almost poetic. Ferdinand's obsession with securing heirs ultimately destroyed the stability of the very throne he was trying to protect. His legacy wasn't in the laws he passed or the wars he fought. It was in the women he scarred, the family he destabilized, and the monarchy he poisoned. In the end, Ferdinand II's reign stands as one of the clearest warnings history can give. When the personal depravity of a ruler bleeds into politics, the damage outlives them. His life was a fusion of anatomy and authority, lust and law, all tangled into one grotesque chapter of Spanish history. And perhaps the cruelest truth of all is this: for every name written on those bloodstained cloths, there are countless others lost to silence. The true number of Ferdinand's victims will never be known. Their stories were smothered under royal privilege and the passage of time. So when we talk about kings and queens, about noble bloodlines and royal marriages, remember Ferdinand. Remember that the grandeur of a crown can hide horrors greater than any battlefield. Remember that history's monsters don't always come in the form of conquerors. Sometimes they wear silk and gold. If you found this story shocking, share it with someone who still believes royal history is all romance and pageantry. Like this video, subscribe to Historian Bunker, and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale history tried to bury. And if you think this was dark, wait until you hear about the 6-year-old child bride forced to marry a 29-year-old king. That story will make you question everything you thought you knew about monarchy.